Hey guys, Shane McMurray from the Wedding Report here. I want to thank you for joining me today. Today we want to talk about understanding how to price your services. And there's lots of things involved in pricing, but I want to walk you through some of the basics and give you some strategies for pricing your products and services in your market. So we'll walk through a little bit about understanding the product life cycle and how that works, the perception that brides and grooms see about the products and services in the market today, what the demand curve is and how that plays into pricing, and also the spending distribution so you can see where brides and grooms are actually spending. And then I'll give you a two-part strategy for pricing your products and services in any type of a market situation or depending on how you are. So let's get started. Price is probably the most important thing outside of the product or service that you sell. And a lot of times many businesses just pull price out of the air. They don't look at the situation around them to figure out what the best price is for them. And sometimes businesses will end up losing money because they're not pricing their products correctly for the amount of cost that goes into building that product or service. I believe there are many factors in the pricing, but the core things are really centered around your abilities, your business conditions, and then the marketing conditions around you. How much are consumers paying? How many competitors are in the market? What are your cost structures? Those are the key things that you need to think about when it comes to pricing. Before we get to pricing and a strategy for pricing, I want to talk about the product service life cycle, because this is really important to understand exactly where the market looks at the wedding services and products that we sell today. The typical cycle is develop a product, introduce it to the market, you grow it, there's a maturity, and then there's a decline. And then during the decline, you typically redevelop or create a niche market or create a segment within that, and then recreate that product or service into a new product or service, and then you see the same cycle of growth. In today's market, I believe that brides and grooms see all of the wedding products and services as very mature, almost commodity type products in the way that they view things. And there are a lot of competitors, and particularly the areas where there is easy access to get into the market, or low barrier to entry into the market. For example, event planners or DJs or photography is really easy. There's a low barrier to entry to get into the market. So when there are many competitors in the market, it's hard to not see a product or service as casual or as a commodity type thing. And in addition, when the values of photography and video and music have changed as much as they have in the past 5 years, that even adds to the frustration. So considering the product life cycle and where we are today with many of the products, the consumer actually views wedding services and products as a commodity. And the perception or value that they place on certain things is not as it used to be. Let me give you an example. There are 4 resorts along one of the roads here that goes to the baseline of the Catalina Mountains. And they're all great resorts, and they're all pretty much offer the same thing. They have great views of the city, they have great views of the mountains, but they really do offer the same thing. The only difference is some of them may offer slightly different food, and there may be a slightly different experience. But if I were going to go to any one of those 4, I would choose the one that gave me the best price for the thing that I'm getting, because I can get the same experience and the same view of everything from each one of those locations. Of course, the properties are different. Of course, there are a few different things, but the reality is I'm going to have the same experience at each one. There's nothing that's really defining them from an experience perspective, and so therefore, why would I spend $100 at one place when I can get the same experience, maybe even better, for less at a different place? So the perception and the view of what it is that consumers see makes a big difference. Let's take a look at the demand curve. The rules for demand curve are pretty simple. As the price decreases, the quantity or number sold actually increases. And this is actually very true from the past couple of years. I've seen a couple of different scenarios that really apply to this. In 2008 to 2009, we saw roughly about an 8% increase in the demand for products and services in the wedding industry. And around the same amount of time, we had Many more players come into the market because of the recession. New photographers, new DJs, new planners, all of these people coming into the market to capture in on, on the wedding business. And what we saw was prices actually decreasing because there were so many other alternatives. Remember, people see these products and services, they go, oh, it's a commodity item. There's no value or difference between one guy or the other guy, so I'm just going to go with the lowest price in many cases. And when that happens, the quantity or the demand for the product or service actually goes up. So from 2009 to 2010, we actually saw a 14% increase in the demand for products and services in the wedding industry, which really points to the fact that as prices declined or decreased, the demand for these products and services actually increased. There's lower cost alternatives, and they all look the same, so I'm just going to go with the lower cost alternatives. This is important to understand as you figure out your strategy for penetrating a market or getting market share. Now let's take a look at what I call spending distribution. And spending distribution really shows us how many people spend above and below the average. And in this example that we see here, this is the average amount that people spend for a wedding in general. This was with 2010 numbers. So $24,066 was the average, and 71% of consumers actually spend below that number. Only 29% spend above that number. And you can see the different segments here broken out between 18 and 11% for each segment. Many of the people that I see are missing opportunity here because they're trying to charge in the highest level of brackets for spending, and yet the market share is just not there. There's not enough market to go around for all of the people that are trying to penetrate into that segment. And there's much opportunity that's missing. So when you see lower cost alternatives, photography, DJ, video, whatever, those guys getting the gigs, it's because they're offering something that's the consumer sees as the same across all spectrums, yet because it's a lower price alternative, it's actually the one that they're going with. This is much more true in the next slide that I'm going to show you. Have a look at this chart. This really blew me away. These are numbers from 2010, and the blue line represents how much brides and grooms are spending on photography, and the red line represents how much professionals are actually charging for photography. 75% of consumers are spending less than $2,000 on photography, and 85% of pros are charging more than $2,000. This shows me that there's a huge disconnect between the reality of the market and what people want to charge for their product and service. Regardless of how skilled you are, regardless of how great you are at what you do, I'm sure you're very talented, the reality is consumers are not willing to spend that much money. Who are these consumers hiring? They're basically hiring the guys you're competing with, the new entry people into the market, the guys that are willing to charge the $5,000, the $1,000, the $1,500 just to get the gig. And it's unfortunate, but this is the reality of what's happening in the market. So what do you do? So I believe there are two things you really need to think about, and I've broken it up into two parts. One is I think you need to think about you and your business, the conditions within that, and then what's happening in the marketplace around you. By thinking about both of these things, you can kind of align your pricing strategy to what you need to do to either get more business or to get more profit. So let's look at part one. This deals with your bookings and sales, experience, skills, and visibility. I believe if you have low bookings or sales and little experience, skills, or visibility within your market, then you should lower your price so you can penetrate in and get more business. If you have a high number of bookings or sales and you have low visibility or experience or skills, then you're obviously doing something that consumers like. You should raise your price. But you should only raise your price if you're completely booked or if you're at complete sales capacity. If you have low bookings or sales but you have high experience or skills, maybe you're new in a market or whatever, you should match pricing within your market or lower your pricing so that you can penetrate in. Remember, the lower the price, the more penetration you get into a market. Remember the demand curve we talked about earlier. And if you have high level of bookings, high level of skill, visibility, you should obviously raise your price, but you should only raise your price if you're completely booked or if you're at complete sales capacity. Part two. Part two deals with the market around you, what's happening in your marketplace. So it really looks at the perceived value by the customer, how much they're willing to spend, and the number of competitors within your market. So taking the other part one section that we talked about, and then also looking at this and applying both of those to your pricing strategy. If is low perceived value within the market and there are a low number of competitors within the market, then you should match the pricing that's going on in the market. You have no one that you're really competing with, so a decreasing of price could penetrate in more. A increasing in price may isolate you a little bit, but really should be matching prices within your market. If there is a high perceived value for the product or service that you're selling and there's a low number of competitors, then you should increase your price. But again, you should only increase your price if you are completely booked or you are at complete sales capacity. Same thing applies for low perceived value and high number of competitors. If there's a low perceived value, in other words, people look at the thing and it's just a commodity item, which a lot of services and products that we're selling today in the wedding industry are commodity type items. And there are a huge amount of competitors in that market. Then in order for you to penetrate in, you've got to lower your price so that you can penetrate in, get completely booked up, and then once you're completely booked up, then you start raising your prices. And if you have high perceived value and there are a high number of competitors within the market, then you should either match pricing that's going on or you should raise your price, and again, only raise your price if you're completely booked or if you're at complete sales capacity. So let's look at a recap on pricing strategy, part one. The first step is to look at you and your business. Bookings and sales, experience, skills, and visibility. If you have low bookings and sales and you have low experience, then you should decrease your price so you can penetrate into the market and build up your clientele. If you have low bookings and sales but high experience, you should match or decrease so you can again penetrate market, build up your clientele. You want to get full of bookings and sales. If you're at a high-low, you increase because you're doing something right, people like you, you have high booking sales. Increase only if you have completely booked up. And again, high, you would increase as well. If you're completely booked, then you would increase. Part two, look at your market conditions. That means look at what's going on around you. How much are consumers spending? How much value do consumers place on the product or service that you're selling? So we're looking at perceived value and then taking also into account how many competitors are competing for the same space as me. So if it's a low, which means there's low perceived value, low number of competitors, you should match pricing because you're not really competing with anyone. If there's a low-high, where there is a low perceived value yet a high number of competitors competing for the same price, you should decrease your price so you can penetrate market and build up your clientele. Remember, the goal is always to get completely booked or to have complete sales capacity so that you can increase your price at those points or create a new segmentation or move off in some other direction. High-low, you want to increase. That means high perceived value, low number of competitors, increase. And if there's a high where there's a high perceived value for the product or service you sell and there are a high number of competitors, you should match or increase price depending on your visibility and all the other things in the market. And finally, only increase your price if you're completely booked or you're at full sales capacity. I realize this approach may be a little bit different than what you've seen before, but I really believe that this approach is the best approach to winning in your market. Looking at yourself, looking at your bookings, looking at your skills, your experience, your visibility in a market, looking at how much consumers are willing to spend, how much value do they place on the thing that I'm doing, how different am I within the market space, what makes me different, and how many competitors are competing for the same thing that I'm competing for. And once you can balance those together and then figure out a strategy to get pricing, I believe that you can completely get booked, completely get to sales capacity, and then begin to raise your price and earn more profit for what you do. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is shane@theweddingreport.com. I want to thank you for spending the time with me today.